Hello, everyone. My name is Hermelinda Vegas. I'm 68 years old, and my son and his wife tried to kick me out of the very house my late husband and I built with our own two hands. They thought I was a fragile old woman they could just push aside, but they had no idea I was about to turn their world upside down.
My daughter, Violetta. The thought of her brought a fresh wave of pain, but also a flicker of her fiery spirit. Violetta would never have stood for this. She would have marched into that kitchen, her eyes blazing, and put Nayara in her place with a few choice words. Violetta had a spine of steel. She got that from Mateo. Elias had my softer heart, but without the steel to reinforce it. But I wasn't Violetta. My strength was quieter, deeper. A river that runs silent but can wear away stone. In that moment, standing among my roses, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound. But beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. Resolve. They thought I didn't have a voice anymore. They thought I was just a sweet old lady content to fade into the wallpaper. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I took a deep breath, the scent of the roses filling my lungs, clearing my head. I walked back into the house, my steps measured and deliberate. Nayara and Elias were in the living room now, their heads bent over a laptop, likely looking at furniture for Carmina's arrival. They didn't even look up as I passed. To them, I was already invisible. It was the biggest mistake they would ever make. I gave myself the rest of the day to let the initial shock subside, to let the raw emotion cool into a solid plan. I moved through the house like a ghost, observing, listening. Nayara was a whirlwind of activity, making phone calls, taking measurements, a general preparing her field of battle. Elias trailed in her wake, his face a mask of anxious compliance. He avoided my eyes, and that hurt more than any of Nayara's cruel words. His silence was his consent. His cowardice was his crime. That evening, after Sophia was tucked into bed, I knew I had to make one final attempt. Not to beg, but to appeal to the son I thought I knew. The little boy who used to run to me for comfort, whose scraped knees I had bandaged in this very kitchen. I needed to hear it from his own lips. I needed to know for certain that the boy I raised was truly gone. I found him in the den, staring blankly at a sports channel. The worn leather armchair that had been his father's favorite seemed to swallow him whole. I turned off the television. The sudden silence made him flinch. "Elias, we need to talk," I said, my voice even and calm, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a weary guilt. "Mom, I know this is sudden." "Sudden?" I cut him off, keeping my voice low but firm. "I heard you and Naya this morning, Elias. This wasn't sudden. This was a plan you kept from me. How long has this been the plan?" He had the decency to look ashamed. He sighed, sinking deeper into the chair. "Look, Mom, things are complicated. Nayara, she's been under a lot of stress. Her mother isn't well, and we thought..." "You thought you could just move another person into my house with a single word to me? You thought I would just step aside and pay for it? Elias, look at me. This is your father's house, my house." This was my chance to understand the real stakes. What's really going on, Elias? Is it about the inheritance you think you're getting? Did you not get the promotion you are so sure about? Is your salary not enough to keep up with Nayara's tastes? His face flushed a deep, mottled red. He started to stammer, and in his fumbling words, the truth began to spill out, ugly and pathetic. The promotion hadn't come through. He'd been passed over. They had racked up thousands in credit card debt trying to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. The fancy car, the designer clothes for Nayara, the expensive summer camps for Sophia. They had even dipped into the college fund we had started for Sophia when she was born, a fund I contributed to every month. Carmina, her wealthy, judgmental mother-in-law, had offered to help, but with strings attached. The main string was that she would move in, and they would prove they could provide her with the comfort she was accustomed to. She saw it as an investment in her daughter's future. "She's threatening to talk to her lawyer, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She said if we can't get our act together, she'll help Nayara file for divorce and seek full custody of Sophia. She says I'm an unstable provider." The words sounded like they had been rehearsed, likely fed to him by Nayara. "I can't lose my daughter, Mom. I just can't." My heart ached for him, for the weak man my son had become. He was trapped, but he had laid the steel jaws of that trap himself, one poor decision at a time. "So you sacrifice your own mother to appease your wife and her mother?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air between us. "You throw me away to save yourself from the consequences of your own choices?" "It's not like that," he insisted, though his eyes couldn't meet mine. "It would just be for a little while. We need the space. We need to show Carmina we're stable. It's for Sophia's good. You'll see." "And what about my good, Elias? What about the respect I am owed as your mother, as the owner of this house? What about your father's memory?" My voice was rising now, the carefully controlled calm beginning to fray. And then he said it. The words that severed the last thread of hope I had for him. He stood up, pacing the room, his voice gaining a desperate, false confidence, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as me. "Mom, you have to be reasonable. You're retired. You have your Social Security. We're the ones with our whole lives ahead of us. We need this. If you can't accept that, then maybe it would be best if you started looking for another place to live." The room went silent again. The hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen seemed to roar in my ears. He had actually said it. My son, my own flesh and blood, had just told me to get out of my own home. The home where I had raised him. The home where his father had died. The home I intended to pass on to him, an inheritance of love, not just of property. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. A strange, chilling calm washed over me. The decision was no longer difficult. It was necessary. He had made his choice, siding with the woman who saw this house as property and not a home, a woman who saw me as a liability and not as family. "I see," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. I looked at my son, at the stranger standing in his father's chair, and I felt nothing but a profound, bottomless pity. He had no idea what he had just unleashed.
I turned and walked out of the room, my back straight. The battle lines had been drawn. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the old oak desk in my bedroom, a place I hadn't used in years. I pulled out a dusty address book, its pages yellowed with age. It had belonged to my daughter, Violetta. I flipped through the names, my fingers tracing her elegant handwriting, a mix of old college friends and colleagues. Each name was a ghost, a memory of a life cut too short. And then I found it, a name I hadn't thought about in a long, long time. Dario Ferragut. Underneath his name, in her bubbly script, Violetta had written, "The smartest, most loyal friend a girl could ask for. He'll be a great lawyer someday. Told him he'd better give her mom a discount." A sad smile touched my lips. Even then, she was looking out for me. I picked up the phone. It was time to find out if Violetta was right. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time volunteer job at the library. It was the first time in 5 years. I told Nayara I had a doctor's appointment, a small lie that felt insignificant in the face of the larger deception I was planning. She barely grunted in response, already barking orders into her phone at a furniture delivery company. My supposed illness didn't warrant a single question about my well-being. I was already a ghost to her. I found the law firm of Ferragut and Associates online. The website was sleek and professional. The picture of Dario showed a man in his late 40s, his dark hair now touched with distinguished gray at the temples, but his eyes were the same, kind, intelligent, and serious. I remembered him as a lanky college kid who would come over for dinner, always engaging in passionate debates with Violetta about politics and philosophy, always treating me with a charming, old-fashioned respect. He'd bring me flowers, just a small bunch of daisies from the corner market, and say, "For the best cook in town, Mrs. Vegas." After Violetta's funeral, he had visited a few times. His grief was a quiet, profound shadow that mirrored my own. Then life, as it does, pulled us in different directions. Making the call was the hardest part. It felt like opening up a wound that had only just begun to scar over. But when his secretary, a pleasant-sounding woman named Carol, put me through, his voice was just as I remembered, only deeper, more resonant. "Ermelinda? Is that really you? It's been too long. Is everything okay?" The immediate warmth and concern in his voice nearly broke me. "Dario, it's so good to hear your voice," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. I, I'm in a bit of a situation. I need some legal advice. I was wondering if I could come see you." "Of course," he said without hesitation. "My 1 o'clock canceled. Can you make it then? Don't worry about the consultation fee. For Violetta's mom, my door is always open." Walking into his downtown office felt like stepping into another world. It was all glass and polished steel, with a panoramic view of the city, a stark contrast to the warm, lived-in clutter of my home. Dario greeted me with a warm hug that felt both comforting and sad, a reminder of the daughter we had both loved and lost. He led me into a spacious office. A framed photo of a smiling, vibrant Violetta sat on his desk, next to a picture of a woman and 2 young boys I assumed were his wife and sons. He had built for himself a life, a good life. I was so glad for him. For a few minutes, we just talked about her, sharing a memory, a laugh. He told me how she had once convinced him to join her in a protest against tuition hikes, and they'd both ended up with ink stains all over their clothes. I told him about the time she tried to bake a cake for his birthday and nearly set the kitchen on fire. It was a necessary balm, a way of reconnecting with the past before I could face the ugliness of my present. And then I took a deep breath. "Dario, the reason I'm here, it's about my house." I laid it all out for him. I left nothing out. The whispers, Nayara's cruelty, the financial troubles, Elias's spinelessness, and the final crushing betrayal of being told to find another place to live. I spoke calmly, methodically, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice, but he could see it in my eyes. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from warm nostalgia to sharp concern, then to a tightly controlled anger. His fingers steepled in front of him, his knuckles white. "I came here today thinking I needed to change my will," I finished, my voice weary. "I wanted to set up a trust maybe, to make sure my granddaughter Sophia gets the house, not them. I don't want Nayara to get her hands on the inheritance after a divorce, or if something happens to Elias." Dario was silent for a long moment,
his gaze fixed on the picture of Violetta, as if asking for her guidance. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were sharp, all business. Ermelinda, a trust is a good idea, but it's not enough, he said, his voice low and serious. A will can be contested. A trust can be challenged, especially by a determined daughter-in-law with a greedy lawyer. They could try to have you declared incompetent, drain your finances with legal fees until you give up. We can't just play defense. We need to build a fortress. He leaned forward, his energy suddenly electric. You mentioned your husband's name was Mateo Vegas and your maiden name is Fuentes, right? I nodded, confused. The Vegas and Fuentes Foundation, he said, the words tasting new and powerful. We don't just put the house in a trust. We transfer the deed, the entire property, to a newly created non-profit foundation, a foundation in your name and Mateo's. You would be the director, living in the house for as long as you wish, managing its affairs. The house would no longer be a private residence they can lay claim to. It would become the asset of a legal entity protected by law. I stared at him, my mind reeling. A foundation? It sounded so grand, so complicated. But I don't know the first thing about running a foundation. You won't have to do it alone, he said, his voice gentle again. I'll be your legal counsel every step of the way. We'll set up a board, we'll handle the paperwork. All you have to do is provide the vision. But what would this foundation do? I asked. A slow smile spread across Dario's face. It was the first time I'd seen him smile that afternoon. That's the beautiful part. It can do whatever you want it to do. Its mission could be to provide resources for the arts or scholarships, or, he paused, his eyes twinkling, it could be dedicated to providing temporary shelter and support for vulnerable women and children who find themselves in situations, well, in situations just like yours.
He leaned back, letting the idea sink in. It was audacious. It was brilliant. It wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a transformation. It would take Nayara's selfish, greedy plan and turn it into something noble. It would honor the memory of my generous, kind-hearted Violetta in a way a simple gravestone at her funeral never could. It wasn't just about saving my home. It was about giving it a new, higher purpose. Can we really do that? I whispered, a spark of hope igniting within me for the first time in days. Can we do it fast enough? She's moving her mother in on Monday. Ermelinda, Dario said, his voice ringing with confidence, I can have the incorporation papers filed by tomorrow morning. I'll draft the deed transfer myself and file it for emergency recording with the county clerk. I know people. It will cost a bit more to expedite, but we can make it happen. They want to throw you out? Fine. We'll make it so the house legally isn't theirs to even enter without your permission. I felt a laugh bubble up from my chest. It was a shaky, watery sound, but it was a real laugh. I was no longer a victim waiting for the axe to fall. I was a client, a founder, the director of the Vegas and Fuentes Foundation. Nayara wanted to play games. I was about to change the entire board. Okay, I said, my voice clear and strong. Let's build a fortress. The days leading up to Carmina's arrival were a strange dance of deception. On the surface, I was the picture of meek compliance. Inside, I was a general mapping out a campaign with Dario as my field marshal. He handled the legal side with swift efficiency, updating me with encrypted emails and brief coded phone calls. My role was to manage the front lines at home, to play the part of the defeated old woman while subtly laying tripwires for the enemy. Nayara, emboldened by my silence, escalated her demands. She was in full Empress mode. The first major skirmish was over the master bathroom. Ermelinda, she announced one afternoon, not even looking up from her tablet where she was browsing for expensive bath towels. My mother has arthritis. She'll need the walk-in shower in the master bathroom. You can use the small one downstairs. The bathroom downstairs was tiny, with a cramped shower stall that hadn't been updated since the 80s. It was a clear power play,
designed to diminish me, to physically move me to the margins of the house. The old me would have argued or perhaps just sadly complied. The new me saw an opportunity. "Of course, dear," I said with a sweet, accommodating smile. "That makes perfect sense. Her comfort is the most important thing. I'll move my things this evening." Her eyes narrowed, suspicious of my easy agreement. She had expected a fight, a tearful protest. My cheerful cooperation was more unsettling to her than any argument would have been. That evening, I moved my toiletries to the downstairs bathroom. But before I did, I took a wrench from Mateo's old toolbox. With a grunt of effort, I gave the handle for the hot water in the master shower a firm, decisive twist. There was a sickening crunch of stripped metal. I then went down to the basement and turned the main valve for that bathroom slightly, just enough to reduce the water pressure to a pathetic trickle. The next morning, Nayara's shriek from the master bathroom was music to my ears. "What on earth? There's no hot water, and the pressure is terrible," she yelled. I feigned concern, poking my head into the bathroom. "Oh, dear me," I said, peering at the handle I had so carefully sabotaged. "It must be broken. It's an old house, you know. The plumbing can be so temperamental. These things happen." I patted her arm reassuringly. "Don't you worry, dear. I'll call a plumber right away." I did call a plumber, a friend of a friend who owed me a favor for knitting sweaters for his twin boys last Christmas. I told him the situation, and he happily agreed to be booked solid for the next 2 weeks. For the rest of her stay before moving day, Nayara was forced to take lukewarm, dribbling showers, fuming in silence while I enjoyed the perfectly functional bathroom downstairs. It was a small victory, but it was delicious. Her next project was clearing out the guest room, which had become my sewing and storage room over the years. It was filled with boxes of Violetta's old things, photo albums, and decades of family memories. "All this junk has to go," she declared, waving a dismissive hand. "We need to get it painted and ready for Mother." "You're absolutely right," I chirped. "I'll get right to it." And I did. I spent 2 days helpfully packing. I bought dozens of heavy-duty boxes and tacking tape. I didn't just pack, I curated. I wrapped every single photo album in multiple layers of bubble wrap. I labeled each box with meticulous, detailed descriptions. Photos: Elias's childhood, 1985 to 1990. Violetta's college textbooks. Christmas ornaments circa 1982. Then, instead of moving the boxes to the attic or the garage, I stacked them. I created a veritable great wall of memories right in the middle of the upstairs hallway, blocking the direct path from the master bedroom to the stairs. It was a beautiful, deeply inconvenient monument to the family history she was trying to erase. "Ermelinda, what is this?" she demanded, trying to navigate the cordboard maze. "I'm just getting everything organized for you, dear," I replied, beaming. "I wanted to make sure nothing precious got lost in the move. It's taking a little longer than I thought. So many memories, you know?" She was trapped. She couldn't tell me to throw away boxes clearly labeled with her husband's childhood photos without looking like a monster. She couldn't complain about my thoroughness. She could only seethe and awkwardly squeeze past the towering stacks of my life, reminded at every turn that she was the intruder. My final act of subtle defiance was in the kitchen. Nayara had announced she was hosting a small welcome dinner for her mother the night she arrived. She handed me a grocery list filled with expensive gourmet ingredients. "I'll be too busy with the movers. You can handle this," she'd said. I took the list with a smile. At the store, I made some creative substitutions. The imported prosciutto became regular deli ham. The artisanal goat cheese was replaced by a block of cream cheese. The fancy Belgian chocolate for the dessert became store-brand baking chips. I even accidentally bought salted butter instead of unsalted for the cake. I spent the day cooking, humming happily. The resulting meal was edible, but it was a far cry from the gourmet feast Nayara had envisioned. It was a meal that screamed budget, a quiet culinary protest against her extravagant plans. Each small act of malicious compliance fueled me. I was no longer just defending, I was actively enjoying myself. I was showing her and myself that I was not a doormat. I was a quiet, smiling, and utterly immovable force. And she, in her arrogance, was completely blind to the real storm that was gathering just over the horizon. While my campaign of domestic disruption was underway, Dario and I were working on the legal front. Hermelinda, he had said during one of our calls, his voice serious. The best defense is a good offense. We need to document everything, every demand, every threat, every dollar. In court, the person with the most paper wins.
The idea of being a spy in my own home felt strange, but Dario's logic was undeniable. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about proving a pattern of abuse, of calculated intent. It was about building a case so solid that she wouldn't even dare to fight it. So I became a record keeper. I bought a small, spiral-bound notebook and kept it with me at all times. In it, I logged every one of Nayada's demands with the date and time. Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. Nayada demanded I vacate the master bathroom for her mother. Wednesday, 11 a.m. Nayada stated all of my junk in the guest room must be thrown out. Thursday, 4:30 p.m., Nayada informed me I would be responsible for cooking a welcome dinner for her mother. I also started tracking finances. I spent an entire afternoon in my dusty office going through old bank statements and canceled checks. I highlighted every check I'd written for groceries, every utility bill I'd paid since they moved in, every time I'd given Elias cash for a car repair or Sophia's school trips. It added up to a staggering amount, well over $20,000 in 5 years. My contribution to the household wasn't just my presence. It was a significant financial subsidy they had taken for granted. This wasn't just disrespect, it was exploitation. I made copies of everything. The most difficult part was the recording. Dario had explained that in our state, as long as one party in the conversation consented, it was legal to record. My smartphone became my weapon. It felt sneaky, underhanded, but every time I hesitated, I remembered Elias's words. Maybe you should find another place to live. That was all the motivation I needed. I captured several damning conversations. One afternoon, I left my phone recording on the kitchen counter, tucked behind the fruit bowl, while I was napping. I caught Nayada on the phone with what sounded like a credit card company. Her voice was strained, pleading. I know the payment is late. Yes, I understand. I'm expecting a significant change in my financial situation very soon. The sale of a property. It was clear proof of her intentions and the desperation that was driving her. The most crucial piece of evidence, however, came from an unexpected source. Maria. Maria had been our part-time housekeeper for over 10 years. She was a quiet, hard-working woman from El Salvador who had watched my children grow up. She had always been respectful and kind, and I knew she had a deep affection for me. I had noticed her looking at me with worried eyes lately, ever since Nayada's behavior had become more brazen. One afternoon, as she was dusting the living room, I asked her to sit with me for a cup of tea. Maria, I know you've seen what's been happening in this house. I know you don't want to get involved, but I need your help. Her eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Vegas, it is not my place, but my heart hurts for you. She does not treat you with respect. Mr. Elias, he is a different man now. He does not see. I told her everything. Not the specifics of the foundation, but that Nayada and Elias were trying to force me out, that they planned to sell the house. I asked her if she had seen or heard anything that might help me. She hesitated, wringing her hands. I do not want to make trouble. I need this job. I understand completely, I said, reaching across and patting her hand. But whatever happens, Maria, I will make sure you are taken care of. You have my word. She took a deep breath and nodded, a look of decision on her face. Last week, she began, her voice low, Señora Nayara was on the phone with her friend. She was laughing. She thought I was in the garden.
She said, the old woman is finally cracking. Just a few more weeks and I'll have her in a home and I can finally sell this dump and buy a proper house in a better school district. Then she said, her inheritance is my retirement plan. I felt the blood drain from my face. To hear my home, Mateo's legacy, called a dump. To know that my life savings were nothing more than her retirement plan? Maria, I said, my voice shaking with a cold fury, would you be willing to sign a statement, an affidavit saying what you heard? My lawyer can draft it. It would be a legal document. She looked me straight in the eye, her eyes gaze firming with resolve. For you, Mrs. Vegas, for Mr. Mateo's memory, yes, I will sign. I called Dario immediately. He was ecstatic. Hermelinda, this is it. This is the smoking gun. Her intent is clear. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a calculated plot to defraud you. We have her. This is more than enough to scare her off any legal challenge. With Maria's signed affidavit, the financial records, and my secret recordings, our fortress was now armed with cannons. Nayara thought she was on the verge of victory. In reality, she was marching her troops into a perfectly laid ambush. The final days before the move were thick with a tense artificial calm. The foundation was legally established, the deed had been transferred and recorded with the county. Dario had sent me a confirmation email with the subject line, "The fortress is built." The trap was set. All we had to do was wait. But 2 days before M-Day, as Dario had started calling it, the plan faced its most dangerous threat, my own heart. It was late, past midnight. I was in the kitchen, unable to sleep, nursing a cup of chamomile tea. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Elias came in, his face pale and haggard in the dim light from under the microwave. He hadn't been sleeping well either. I could see the dark circles under his eyes. He looked lost, like a little boy again, the way he did when he'd had a nightmare. He didn't speak at first, just sat down at the table across from me, the same table where I'd helped him with his homework and listened to his teenage dramas. He said, "Mom, I can't do this." "Do what, Ilias?" "This whole thing, with Nayara, with Carmina. She's become... I don't know who she is anymore. All she talks about is money, about what we're going to do once we sell the house. She's already picked out a new one, in a gated community. She showed it to me online."
For a terrifying moment, I almost believed him. This was my son, my only living child. His pain was my pain. The love a mother has for her child is a powerful primal thing, and it was screaming at me to forgive him, to pull him into a hug and tell him everything would be okay. It would be so easy to give in, to call Dario and call the whole thing off for the sake of a fragile, perhaps temporary peace. But then I looked closer. I saw the desperation in his eyes, but I didn't see true remorse. I saw fear. Fear of Nayara, fear of being alone, fear of financial ruin. He wasn't coming to me out of a renewed sense of love or duty. He was coming to me because he was scared, and he was looking for an easy way out of the mess he had created. He wanted me to be the one to fix it, just as I had always fixed everything for him. And I remembered Dario's warning. They could try to have you declared incompetent. What if this was a trick? A last-ditch effort by Nayara, using him as a pawn to get me to show my hand, to prove I was emotionally unstable and easily manipulated. I slowly pulled my hand back from his reach. The warmth of the mug was a comfort. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea before I spoke. "Elias," I said, my voice soft but unyielding, "where was this courage last week when you told me to find another place to live? Where was this conscience when Nayara was treating me like a servant in my own home for the last 5 years? He flinched, as if I had slapped him. I was wrong. I was scared. "I know you were," I said, and a genuine wave of pity washed over me. "But being scared doesn't excuse your actions. You made choices, Elias. You stood by and watched her plan all of this. You sided with her against me. A promise from you right now? I'm sorry, but it doesn't mean very much. Actions are what matter."
He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He was seeing a version of his mother he had never seen before, not the endlessly forgiving, self-sacrificing woman he had always known, but someone with boundaries of steel. "It's too late, son," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Things have been put in motion that cannot be stopped. You made your choice. Now I have made mine." He stood up, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. He expected me to fold, to welcome the prodigal son home. He had underestimated me one last time. He turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. I sat alone in the silence, my heart aching with the grief of a love that had been irrevocably broken. I had passed the test. I had chosen self-respect over a hollow, false reconciliation. The path forward was clear, but God, it was lonely. The tears I had refused to shed for myself now fell for the son I had lost. Monday morning arrived, bright and unseasonably warm, the day of judgment. I woke up with a strange sense of calm. The grief and turmoil of the past week had settled into a hard, clear certainty. I chose my outfit with care, a simple but elegant navy blue dress, the string of pearls Mateo had given me for our 25th anniversary, and comfortable, sensible shoes. I was not dressing for a battle, but for a board meeting, the first official meeting of the Vegas and Fuentes Foundation. Downstairs, the house was buzzing with a manic energy. Nayara was everywhere at once, a general on the verge of what she believed was her greatest victory. Her hair and makeup were perfect. She wore a sharp, expensive-looking pantsuit, the kind you wear to sign important contracts. She was playing the part of the lady of the manor. At precisely 10 o'clock, a large, gleaming moving van pulled up to the curb, followed by a sleek black sedan. Carmina emerged from the car. She was Nayara's mother in every sense, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere coat. Despite the warm weather, her expression of one of bored entitlement. She surveyed my house, her lips pursed with a slight frown, as if it was a slightly disappointing but acceptable acquisition, a stepping stone. Elias got out of the driver's side, his movements stiff and awkward. He looked like a man being led to his own execution. He couldn't look at the house, couldn't look at his mother-in-law, and he certainly couldn't look at me as I stood by the living room window, watching the whole pathetic parade. Nayara greeted her mother with a triumphant air kiss. "Welcome home, Mother," she announced, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I had arranged my own reception. On the front porch, I had set up a small wicker table with a pitcher of iced tea and 2 glasses. I took my seat in one of the wicker chairs, smoothed my dress, and waited. I had asked Dario to arrive at 10:15, giving them just enough time to get their luggage out and march up to the front door. Punctuality was, after all, a sign of a well-run organization. The movers began unloading a mountain of expensive-looking luggage. Carmina directed them with imperious waves of her hand. Finally, the 3 of them, Nayara leading the charge, Carmina looking smug, and Elias trailing like a ghost, marched up the stone pathway my husband had laid with his own hands. Nayara stopped short when she saw me sitting there, calmly sipping my tea, her brow furrowed in annoyance. "Ermelinda, what are you doing just sitting there? Can you at least open the door so the men can start bringing things in?" I took another slow sip of my tea before answering. I looked past her at the beautiful oak door that Mateo had been so proud of. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Nayara." "What are you talking about?" she scoffed. "Stop playing games and open the door." "It's not a game," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I simply don't have the authority to let you in." Just then, a car pulled into my driveway. Dario got out. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He looked every inch the powerful, confident lawyer he was. He walked up the path and stood beside my chair, giving me a small, reassuring nod. Nayara's eyes darted from me to Dario, a flicker of confusion and alarm crossing her face. "Who is this?" "Nayara, Carmina," I said, my voice carrying a newfound strength. "I'd like you to meet Dario Ferragant. He's my lawyer, and he's the legal counsel for the new owners of this property." The silence that followed my announcement was stunning. Nayara's jaw literally dropped. Carmina's smug expression dissolved into one of baffled indignation. Elias just looked at the ground as if it would swallow him whole. New owners? Nayara finally sputtered, a harsh, incredulous laugh escaping her lips. What on earth are you talking about? This is my house, or it will be. Dario stepped forward, his presence calm and authoritative. He opened his briefcase and took out a sheaf of papers. Actually, Miss Fuentes, it is not. As of 9 a.m. last Friday, this property, located at 124 Willow Street, was legally transferred and deeded to a non-profit entity.
He handed a document to Nayara. She snatched it from his hand. I could see the official letterhead of his firm, the county seal, the dense block of legal text. The Vegas and Fuentes Foundation? She read aloud, her voice a cocktail of confusion and rage. What is this? Some kind of joke? I assure you, it's no joke, Dario continued smoothly. The foundation is the sole legal owner of this house and all its assets. Mrs. Vegas here is the lifetime director of the foundation, and as such, she resides on the premises to manage its affairs. Unless you have a written invitation from the director, you are trespassing. Nayara's face was a storm of emotions. She looked from the paper to my face, her eyes blazing with hatred. You can't do this. This is illegal. I'll call the police. I'll tell them you're a crazy old woman who's been manipulated. She fumbled for her phone. This was the moment, the final checkmate. Please do, Dario said, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. I would be happy to speak with them. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. And when they arrive, I will provide them with my own file. He tapped his briefcase. A file that includes a signed, notarized affidavit from a witness who overheard you detailing your plan to fraudulently acquire this property. A file that includes financial statements documenting years of financial exploitation. And most interestingly, a file containing several audio recordings of your recent conversations. The one where you threaten your husband with a custody battle if he doesn't comply with your scheme is particularly compelling. The color drained from Nayara's face. She looked as if she had been physically struck. Her hand, holding the phone, fell to her side. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was checkmated. She had walked into a steel trap, and it had snapped shut around her. She shot a venomous glare at Elias. You knew about this. He shook his head mutely, his face a picture of pure misery. He hadn't known the details, but he knew he had lost. He had bet on the wrong woman. Carmina, who had been watching this exchange with growing horror, finally found her voice. Nayara, she hissed, grabbing her daughter's arm. What is going on? What has she done? She's ruined everything, Nayara shrieked with hysteria. On the contrary, I said, speaking for the first time since Dario had arrived. I stood up from my chair, feeling taller than I had in years. I have saved everything. I have saved this house from your greed. I have saved my husband's legacy, and I have saved myself. I looked at the three of them, a pathetic tableau of thwarted ambition. Dario is correct, I stated calmly. You are trespassing. I suggest you have your movers put your luggage back in the van and leave the premises immediately. There was nothing more to say. Defeated, they turned. Carmina practically dragged a sobbing, hysterical Nayara back toward the street. Elias gave me one last haunted look, a look of desperation, of regret, of a man who knew he had just lost everything that ever mattered, before he turned and followed them. I watched them go. I watched the movers hastily reload the expensive luggage. I watched the black sedan and the moving van pull away from the curb and disappear down the street. Then I turned to Dario, and for the first time, a real, unrestrained smile spread across my face. Well, I said, picking up the pitcher of iced tea, I believe the first board meeting of the Vegas and Fuentes Foundation is now officially in session. In the days that followed, the silence in the house was different.
It was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of a Cold War, but the clean, quiet peace of a battle won. The towering wall of boxes in the hallway was gone, their contents lovingly restored to their rightful places. The house felt bigger, lighter. It could breathe again. I didn't hear from Elias for a week. There were no pleading phone calls, no angry texts, just nothing. It was a void that was both painful and necessary. The break had to be clean. Then, about 2 weeks after the disastrous moving day, a letter arrived. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a notification that Nayara had filed for divorce from Elias, citing irreconcilable differences. The news didn't bring me joy, only a profound sadness for the family that had been shattered by greed. Dario and I got to work. There was so much to do. We registered the foundation officially, set up its bank accounts, and drafted bylaws. The mission was clear: to provide a safe, temporary haven for women and their children fleeing domestic turmoil or unexpected hardship. The house would be the first of, I hoped, many such havens. We called it Violetta's house. I poured my energy into the transformation. The guest room that Nayara had coveted was painted a cheerful, sunny yellow. The master bedroom, which I no longer wanted for myself, was converted into a suite with 2 beds for a mother and child. I moved into a smaller bedroom, one with a perfect view of the rose garden. It was all I needed. 6 months after that fateful Monday, Violetta's house welcomed its first residents, a young woman named Sarah and her 5-year-old son, Leo. They had arrived with nothing but a single suitcase and the frightened look in their eyes that I knew all too well. I'll never forget the first evening they were here. I had made my famous chicken pot pie, Matteo's favorite. The 3 of us sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my own family had fallen apart. But now it felt different. Leo, after being shy for hours, finally giggled at something I said. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "Thank you, Hermelinda," she whispered. I started to think there were no kind people left in the world." "There are always kind people, dear," I told her, my own eyes misting over. Sometimes they just have to be reminded of their own strength. In the months that followed, the house came alive. The silence was replaced by the patter of little feet, by the sound of women sharing stories and offering each other support over cups of tea, by the sound of laughter. I was no longer just a lonely widow in a big house. I was the director, a mentor, a protector. I had found a new family, a new purpose. My home was no longer a monument to a past I had lost, but a living, breathing testament to a future I was building. It's been over a year now. Violetta's house is thriving. We've helped 6 families get back on their feet. Dario manages the legal and financial side with tireless dedication, all pro bono in Violetta's name. Maria, my loyal housekeeper, is now the full-time house manager. And me? I'm the heart of it all. I cook, I garden, I listen. I see Elias sometimes. We arranged through our lawyers for him to see Sophia every other weekend. He picks her up at the curb. He looks older, tired, but there's a quiet dignity to him that wasn't there before. He lost his wife and his inheritance, but in the wreckage, he seems to be finding himself. We are polite, distant. The wound is too deep to ever fully heal, but maybe someday it will scar over enough for us to have a real conversation. I hope so.
Sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I sit on the porch, looking out at the roses. I don't feel bitterness or a thirst for revenge. I feel peace. I learned a hard lesson at 68 years old, that your greatest strength is not in how much you can endure, but in knowing when you must refuse to endure any longer. I learned that boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but fences to protect the sacred ground of your own self-respect. They tried to take my house, but in the end, they gave me a home filled with more love and purpose than I could have ever imagined. They tried to render me powerless, but instead, they forced me to discover a power I never knew I had. My story isn't about losing a son. It's about finding myself. Thank you for letting me share my journey with you. The story of what happened at 124 Willow Street. It has helped me to speak it all out loud. Your comments from all over the world have been a wonderful comfort. It reminds me that while our circumstances may be different, the feelings of love, loss, betrayal, and the fight for dignity are universal. This journey has taught me so much, but it also makes me wonder, my story, does it remind you of anything in your own life? Have you ever felt that your sacrifices were taken for granted, or your worth was overlooked by the very people you loved most? We all have a house we must protect, whether it's our family, our peace of mind, or our own soul. I would be honored if you would share your own perspectives and stories in the comments below. Your voice matters.